The sentence came without warning, slipping into the room like a blade wrapped in calm. At the dinner table, with the television murmuring in the background and steam rising from untouched food. Her husband spoke as if he were sharing routine news. He said he had decided to bring her home. Not after his mother was discharged, before. He said it clearly, firmly, as though the matter had already been settled somewhere far beyond her reach. Mariam froze. Her hand tightened around her glass, but she did not lift it. She watched his face, searching for doubt, for hesitation, for any sign that he knew how deeply those words cut. There was none. His eyes were steady, his voice controlled. He spoke about responsibility, about family, about how difficult things had become since his mother fell ill. Each word sounded reasonable on its own, but together they formed something cruel. Her mind filled the silence he left behind. Her was not a stranger. Her was the woman who had appeared during hospital visits and late-night calls. The woman who always seemed to know where he was, what he needed, how to comfort him. The woman whose presence had slowly pushed Mariam to the edges of her own marriage. Mariam did not argue. She did not raise her voice or ask questions she already knew the answers to. She simply nodded once, the movement small and mechanical. Inside, something cracked. It was not loud. It did not explode. It split quietly, the way trust breaks when it has been weakened for too long. He continued talking, explaining how temporary it would be, how his mother needed care, how Mariam should understand. She listened without hearing. Her thoughts rushed backward, replaying months of ignored unease. The canceled plans. The secretive phone calls. The way he grew distant while insisting nothing was wrong. Each memory lined up neatly now, forming a clear picture she could no longer deny. When dinner ended, he stood and cleared his plate, calm and satisfied. As if a burden had been lifted from him. Mariam remained seated, staring at the empty space he left behind. The house felt unfamiliar, like she had stepped into someone else's life without permission. That night, the bedroom felt colder than usual. He fell asleep quickly, breathing evenly, untroubled. Mariam lay beside him, staring at the ceiling, her heart pounding. The darkness pressed in on her thoughts, giving them space to grow sharp and relentless. She realized the betrayal was not just emotional. It was strategic. He had made a decision that erased her voice, her consent, her place. She thought about confronting him, about demanding answers, about breaking down and asking why she was no longer enough. But another feeling began to rise, quiet and dangerous. It was clarity, the kind that arrives after denial has burned away. Mariam understood then that this was not a mistake. It was a choice, and choices had consequences. The next morning, she moved through the house like a guest. She watched him prepare for work, noticed how relaxed he seemed, how confident. He kissed her goodbye out of habit, unaware that the meaning behind that gesture had changed. When the door closed behind him, Mariam stood alone in the silence. Her chest tight, she walked through the room slowly, touching familiar objects as if confirming they were real. The couch where they had laughed. The kitchen where she had cooked meals he no longer noticed. This house had been built on shared dreams. And now it was being reshaped without her permission. Her phone buzzed with a message from him. A reminder. He would bring her home soon. He hoped Mariam would be supportive. Supportive, the word echoed in her mind, heavy and bitter. She felt anger rise, but it did not explode. It settled deep inside her, solid and focused. Mariam sat down and began to think. Not about how to beg him to stay. Not about how to compete. But about how to reclaim what had been taken from her. She considered the woman he planned to bring into their home. She wondered what promises had been made, what stories had been told. She wondered if that woman believed she was doing the right thing too. The thought did not soften the pain. It sharpened it. Mariam looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. Tired eyes, tight jaw. But beneath the exhaustion, there was something else. Resolve. She had been wronged not by accident, but by design. And that truth demanded an answer. By the time evening came, Mariam had stopped crying. She moved with purpose, her thoughts quick and organized. She replayed conversations, remembered words he thought she had forgotten. She began to see patterns, connections, weaknesses. This was not about anger anymore. It was about balance, about making him see what he had done as the sun set. Casting long shadows across the walls, Miriam understood one final thing. Love had not protected her. Silence had not saved her. And forgiveness, given too early, had only made the betrayal easier. If he believed she would adjust, he was wrong. This was only the beginning. Miriam woke the next morning with a tight knot in her chest, the weight of yesterday's revelation pressing down like a storm. She moved through the house silently, careful not to disturb the fragile routine her husband still clung to. Every sound he made, every casual step, reminded her that he was unaware of the storm brewing in her mind. She felt a strange calm beneath the anger, a clarity that sharpened with every heartbeat. Revenge was no longer just a thought, it had become a plan. Quiet and precise. She watched him from the corner of her eye as he went about his morning, making coffee, scrolling through messages, humming as though nothing had changed. In his mind, he was solving a problem, doing his duty to his mother, keeping the household running smoothly. He framed himself as responsible, noble even. But Miriam saw the cracks in that facade. She noticed the way he hesitated before answering certain messages, the way he smiled too quickly at the mention of her, the woman he intended to bring home. Every small gesture, every tiny detail was a thread she could pull. She didn't act yet. Not openly. Her revenge needed patience. She began recording conversations discreetly, noting behaviors, cataloging the truth he tried to hide. Her mind worked like a machine, analyzing, connecting, predicting. The more she observed, the more she understood his reasoning. Not to excuse it, never to excuse it, but to anticipate it. She knew he believed he was doing right. But he had crossed a line she could never ignore. Miriam's thoughts became consumed by scenarios. How would she confront him? Publicly or privately? Should she expose his choices to family, or keep it contained for now? Every imagined confrontation played out like a movie, each ending slightly different, each more satisfying than the last. And yet, beneath the satisfaction, a shadow of doubt crept in. Would exposing him truly heal her, or would it only deepen the wound? The question haunted her. She thought of the woman he planned to bring home. Miriam didn't hate her, not really. The woman was a pawn, a partner in a scheme Miriam had not consented to. Yes, but also someone manipulated by circumstances. Miriam's anger was not toward her alone. It was aimed at her husband. At the betrayal, at the calculated way he had sidelined her. The woman's presence was a threat, but the real target of her plan was the man who had broken trust so casually. Days passed, each one sharpening her resolve. Miriam walked through her routines, mechanically making coffee, tidying the house, glancing at her phone, but her mind was constantly planning, adjusting. She replayed conversations, remembering the exact tone of his words, the small pauses, the justifications. Each memory became a tool. Each memory strengthened the blueprint of what she intended to do. She knew that when the time came, her actions needed to be precise, controlled, unshakable. Chaos would not serve her. Yet, in the quiet moments, doubt returned. She questioned herself repeatedly. Was she becoming someone unrecognizable? Could she carry out revenge without losing her moral compass? Each imagined act of exposure felt satisfying in theory, but left a bitter taste in her mind. She wrestled with her own conscience, realizing that revenge might not bring relief. It might only perpetuate pain. Still, the need for justice burned, an unrelenting fire she could not ignore. Miriam began testing boundaries. She asked questions casually, letting him speak, watching for slips. Each answer he gave was carefully constructed, rehearsed even, but cracks appeared where he least expected them. She noticed inconsistencies between what he said to her and what he told family. His attempts to justify his decisions revealed arrogance and blind certainty, the very qualities she would exploit if she chose to act. Every lie, every half-truth, strengthened her control over the situation. She also observed her own emotions. noting how anger mingled with fear, how hurt intertwined with a strange exhilaration. Revenge was addictive in its anticipation. She felt powerful simply knowing she could disrupt the narrative he had written. And yet she reminded herself that this power had to be tempered with patience. Acting too soon could backfire. She needed the moment to be right, the timing precise. Even mundane interactions became tests of her resolve. When he joked about how easily she adjusted to changes in the household, she smiled politely, but inside she was calculating. Each insult, each dismissal was a reminder of why she could not remain passive. Her mind traced endless possibilities, imagining confrontations, manipulations, revelations all aimed at exposing the truth he had hidden so neatly. Miriam began to see the psychological patterns in him, the small ways he controlled situations without overt coercion. She realized that revenge would not just be an emotional release, it would be strategic. It would need to dismantle the illusion he had built around himself, forcing him to face the consequences of his choices. And she realized, too, that seeing him confront himself might be more satisfying than anything else. Sleep became a restless ritual. Nights were spent rehearsing words and actions, considering the impact of each choice. Miriam felt tension coil within her, a tight spring that demanded release but also required control. Each day she moved closer to the point of action, yet she knew the final decision could not be rushed. Patience, she reminded herself, was a weapon. Her anger was tempered by a strange clarity. She was no longer simply reacting. She was thinking, observing, calculating. Revenge was no longer an impulse, it was a discipline. Each choice, each observation was carefully logged in her mind. The anticipation of confronting him became both thrilling and terrifying. Miriam also wrestled with empathy. She recognized the humanity in him even as he wronged her. Understanding his perspective did not excuse his behavior, but it complicated her emotions. The realization that he believed he was right made her revenge feel more just, but also more morally complicated. The internal battle became almost as intense as the external one. She was planning. Every day brought a small victory in observation. A misstep, a slip, a revealing glance, these became clues. Miriam felt the tension building to a breaking point. The moment of confrontation she knew would define the rest of her life. She imagined him realizing the consequences of his decisions. Imagined the weight of guilt settling on him in the way it had settled on her. The thought was intoxicating. But she reminded herself to stay disciplined as the day approached when the woman was supposed to arrive. Miriam felt a mixture of fear and exhilaration. The plan she had constructed in her mind was almost complete, yet the final step remained undecided. Would she expose him completely, or would she find another way to reclaim her power without destruction? The answer was still unclear. Miriam understood one final truth. Revenge was not simple. It was never straightforward. It required careful calculation, patience, and self-control. The anticipation was nearly as powerful as the act itself. And she realized that whatever choice she made, it would forever change the dynamics of her marriage. And perhaps her own sense of self. In the quiet before the storm, Miriam felt the full weight of her emotions. Anger, hurt, and determination intertwined in a tight knot. She knew that the next steps would define not just her relationship with her husband, but her understanding of justice, power, and self-respect. And in that tension, she found a strange, electrifying clarity. The war inside her had sharpened her mind and her resolve. The moment of reckoning was near, and she was ready to face it. The day had come. The suitcase stood by the door, neat and final, a symbol of decisions already made. Miriam's husband moved around the house with his usual calm, organizing, checking messages, humming softly as though nothing had changed. He spoke to her casually about the plan, explaining the schedule, logistics, and timing. He assumed compliance, assumed she would accept this intrusion into their home with quiet understanding. He did not notice her eyes following his every move, sharp and steady, weighing every word. Miriam listened silently, measuring her reactions, masking the storm inside. Her mind raced through every detail, every observation from the past weeks, every inconsistency he had revealed. She knew him, perhaps, more than he realized. She understood his logic, his pride, his blind spots. And she had also prepared. Not with threats or loud confrontations, but with evidence, small truths, casual slips. Private confessions she had recorded without his knowledge. Her thoughts oscillated between two extremes. Expose him now, publicly, with full impact, or use subtle methods to reclaim control without destruction. Both paths promised satisfaction, yet each carried risk. She had rehearsed the moment over and over. In one scenario, she could confront him in front of family, forcing him to face humiliation and guilt simultaneously. In another, she could confront him alone, stripping away his defenses, leaving him to confront his conscience. Each outcome would teach him a lesson, yet the method mattered as he spoke. She noticed the small habits that betrayed him, how he repeated phrases, how he avoided certain words, how his tone shifted slightly when discussing her, the woman he intended to bring home. She cataloged everything, knowing that one slip could give her the leverage she needed. And yet the longer she listened, the more she realized that exposure for its own sake might not bring the closure she sought. True victory, she knew, required precision, intention, and timing. Mariam finally spoke, her voice calm, quiet, almost too controlled. She didn't yell, she didn't accuse. She laid bare the impact of his choices in clear, deliberate words. She described the betrayal, the erosion of trust, the way his actions had shifted the foundation of their home. She reminded him of her presence, of her importance, and of the respect he had casually dismissed. Her words were measured, her tone steady, yet each sentence carried weight. And each pause was filled with consequence. Her husband's face flickered. A shadow of realization crossed his features, brief but unmistakable. He opened his mouth to defend himself, to justify, but Mariam continued, building the narrative with quiet authority. Then, without warning, she produced her final piece of leverage, the recording. Not of secrets or lies, but of his own words, spoken to family, admitting he knew she would be hurt and that he believed she would adjust. The room went silent. The weight of truth pressed down, unrelenting. Mariam's husband stared at the evidence, the words now undeniable, the betrayal, he thought, hidden, laid bare. His carefully constructed image faltered. He could no longer frame his actions as noble, responsible, or justified. For the first time, he faced the consequences of his choices in a way he could not evade. Mariam felt a surge of power. Every ounce of anger, every sleepless night, every small observation had led to this moment. She could escalate further, expose him completely, destroy his reputation, and claim the satisfaction she had envisioned. The option was there, tangible, tantalizing, and frightening. Yet, as she looked at him, the man she had once trusted, she saw vulnerability, confusion, and a flicker of guilt. The realization struck her with force. Revenge could hurt him. Yes, but it could also harm her in ways she had not anticipated. She paused, measuring her next step. The act of exposing him further would satisfy a raw desire for justice. But it might also consume her, leaving her hollow and resentful. She recognized that the power she had in this moment was not just about punishment. It was about choice. She could continue down the path of anger, or she could reclaim herself without destruction. Mariam chose the harder path. She did not destroy him. She did not publicly humiliate him. Instead, she acted decisively in a way that preserved her integrity and autonomy. She packed her own bag, a simple act of self-preservation that communicated more than words ever could. Leaving was not surrender. It was a consequence he could not control, a demonstration of agency she had reclaimed. Her departure was silent. No dramatics, no yelling, no tears. Just the quiet authority of a person who had endured betrayal and refused to be defined by it. Her husband tried to speak, tried to explain, tried to plead, but Mariam remained calm, composed, and unshaken. The recording, the evidence, the confrontational had been enough to make him understand, even if partially, the gravity of his actions. In the days that followed, Miriam felt a complicated mix of emotions. There was relief, yes, the quiet satisfaction of reclaiming control over her own life. There was grief, the mourning of trust, and shared dreams that would never be restored. And there was clarity, the recognition that true justice is not about inflicting pain, but about reclaiming power over oneself. Her husband struggled with his conscience. He attempted to justify, to blame circumstances, to appeal to her sense of forgiveness. But Miriam had learned something crucial. Understanding after betrayal is not the same as respect before it. He could recognize the harm he had caused, but he could not undo the damage. The lesson, once learned, was irreversible. Miriam discovered that the anticipation of revenge, the planning, the control over the narrative had given her insight she might never have gained otherwise. She realized that the act of leaving, the act of choosing herself over vindication, was more powerful than any act of retaliation. Revenge, she understood, is fleeting. The consequences of decisions, the integrity maintained in the face of betrayal, those are enduring. She also realized the psychological weight of revenge. To act solely on anger is to hand control to the emotion itself. By choosing her actions thoughtfully, Miriam had preserved her moral compass while still asserting power. She had confronted betrayal with intelligence, courage, and calm. The balance between justice and mercy had been difficult to strike, but striking it had restored her sense of self. Miriam's departure reshaped the dynamics of her life. The home they had shared now felt altered. No longer a sanctuary, but a space defined by absence and consequence. Her choice forced reflection both in herself and in him. He could no longer ignore the truth, and she had taken steps to protect herself without surrendering to anger. The act of leaving became her final statement, one that spoke louder than confrontation or revenge ever could. In the quiet aftermath, Miriam felt the lingering tension of betrayal and the empowerment of autonomy. She understood that revenge, while tempting, often perpetuates pain rather than resolving it. She had glimpsed the seductive satisfaction of inflicting consequences. But she had chosen a path that preserved dignity, integrity, and self-respect. The lesson was profound. The hardest choice often leads to the strongest. Freedom. Miriam had faced the moment of ultimate decision. She had contemplated revenge, weighed its satisfaction against its cost, and ultimately chosen herself. In doing so, she learned that power is not always in destruction. Sometimes it lies in restraint, in deliberate action, and in walking away from what diminishes you. Her clarity and calm became her shield, her departure a statement, and her integrity the ultimate victory. The story did not end with loud confrontation or dramatic retribution. It ended with understanding, with the quiet reclaiming of life, with the realization that betrayal does not have to define one's future. Miriam had turned a moment of crisis into a lesson in agency, proving that strength is often found in self-preservation rather than revenge, and that the most meaningful victories are those that leave one whole rather than hollow.